Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and by popular demand, I thought I'd share my League starter for Siege of the Atlas with you guys. Now, this video is going to be made up of a ton of research I've done on League starting in Siege of the Atlas. There's a whole bunch of pitfalls that I've discovered, as well as interesting tidbits. So if you're planning on League starting, in any kind of competitive nature in Siege of the Atlas, this is definitely the video for you, and it's definitely going to be worthwhile. It's a whole lot in here which a lot of people aren't considering. And if you've got any sort of League start plans, you're definitely going to want to hear about it. Okay, so my initial plan before I saw the Siege of the Atlas expansion was to League start Corrupting Fever, as it was just such a knockout hit in 3.16. It was easily one of the most powerful League starters I've ever had the pleasure to play, and I was ready to follow it up with a round 2 with everything mapped out, and I was sure it was going to be better than ever. I had a full guide all planned out and ready to go. And then the Siege of the Atlas reveal dropped and everything changed. And that's going to be the content of this video. Corrupting Fever is now a very, very risky League starter. However, I'm still planning on starting it. Let's get into why it's so risky and why your build might be risky and you don't even know it. But first, I'm going to have to apologize, as with all of these risks and all of these unknowns that I'm about to talk about, I am not confident putting out a League start guide for Corrupting Fever anymore, as I believe it's a fairly challenging build to get online now, and it's also one that requires a reasonably high amount of experience, as there's going to be quite a lot of unknowns and things that you're going to have to tackle with your own knowledge and get through and problem solve yourself. So if you thought starting Corrupting Fever in 3.16 was hard, it's probably going to be even harder in 3.17, purely from the fact that you're going to have to juggle a bunch of new systems and really min-max it on the fly yourself. Now, of course, I'm going to be playing this build alongside you, so you can tune into the stream when I'm playing it as well, and I'm going to have daily uploads about my progress and findings, but overall, it's probably going to be a little bit of a challenging one, and let's get into the reasons why that is now. So we're going to use my build and all the things that I've run into as problems as a template here, but you're going to be able to apply all these things to your own builds as well, as every build generally has something on this list which they use, and it's going to be quite a big risk for you, and one that you're going to have to tackle with a little bit of problem solving and innovation. So again, I apologize for not having the guide, but League Start really is a magical time, and I'd feel awful if I put out a half-baked guide and people didn't have a good time. So I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth the time or the views or any of that. I think that you guys deserve better. So without further ado, let's get into it. Why is it risky to League start Corrupting Fever? And we'll follow this up with the pros, why I'm taking this risk. So the first up is Conqueror Gear. So a lot of builds have these massive choke points, these inflection points where they get super powered after they equip or craft a certain Conqueror piece of gear. For Corrupting Fever, that is going to be the +2 amulet and the Corrupting Fever bow. So both of these things previously required influence. Now influence is going to be an exclusively end game system now. Now, you're not going to have access to it while you're leveling through the Atlas, and you're only going to have access to it after T14 maps overall start dropping, and then even then it's going to be in a fairly limited capacity equal to the previous Guardian drop rates. So we know how hard it was to get Elder and Shaper items on League Start. All those times ago when Bleed Bow was really popular and Citadel bows, Elder Citadel bows were 2 exalts. It's going to be this a scenario. Influence items are going to be a lot less available, and as such, any sort of crafting or mandatory choke point or item that is involved in that is going to be a lot harder to acquire and a lot more difficult to acquire early. So let's talk a little bit about the example I have here. So the Corrupting Fever bow required a Warlord's Exalted Orb. To give you guys a bit of context, those Exalted Orbs cost about 2 exalts in Scourge League. And they definitely weren't plentiful either. There was only a handful of them up at a time in the first few days. Now, this is going to be all the worse in the new expansion, as you're going to have to first get to T14 maps, then you're going to need to get the Conqueror maps, and then you're going to even need to drop the Conqueror's Exalted Orb off of those maps. So the supply is going to be way, way lower. We're going from a world in which these orbs were mandatory essentially to complete these maps, and now we're going to be in a world where it's completely optional. Most people aren't going to be interested in doing it because I hate Cirrus, and overall it's going to be a lot lower supply. So if your build relies on Conqueror influence items, it's a massive choke point, whether it's +1 strike gloves to take advantage of shotgunning, the Chaos Bow, which requires a Hunter's Exalted Orb, the Fizz Bow, the Fire Bow. All these bows are going to have massive demand associated with them, and there's not going to be a whole lot of supply for these Exalted Orbs or these bases. So it's definitely going to be a bit of a challenge, and this puts a massive wrench in the progression path of Corrupting Fever. Now, I have a few solutions of this of my own, which I think might work. I'm probably going to stay on wands a little bit longer than I did in Scourge League, but overall, it's something you're going to have to overcome on the fly. We don't know how much they're going to be, how common they're going to be, what the drop rate of Conqueror's maps are going to be, or any of that. So it's a massive question mark, and this is one of the contributing factors why I didn't really feel comfortable making a guide. So next up, in a similar vein, Awakener Orbs. Less available, way less available. Cirrus, as I mentioned, going to be less available. Less people are going to be fighting him. It's not mandatory to do a Cirrus 8 anymore, so there's going to be a lot less Awakener Orbs, and a lot more people are going to need them. So overall, I think it's definitely going to be a challenge. If you need that Awakener Orb for your build to kind of like Awakener Orb, for example, like a plus 1 power charge and Reservation Helmet or something along those lines, you're definitely maybe going to have a few issues with that, especially earlier on in the first 3 or 4 days. So, to kind of compare it with something, you guys know how rare a Watcher's Eye is early on. Well, it's going to be on that level of rarity, unfortunately. It's exactly comparable in terms of drop rate and frequency that we're going to be getting these maps. So, there's generally about like 3 or 4 Watcher's Eyes in the first 2 or 3 days available at any time. The demand for Watcher's Eye is much less, and overall Awakener Orbs, they're just going to be pretty expensive, I feel, in the early days of the league. So if your build needs one, beware. It could be a little bit of an issue. All right, let's move on. Amulets. This goes for all spellcasters. Amulets are a different game now. Lots of spellcasters kind of rely on that +2 amulet bump to really get them going in red maps. Corrupting Fever was no exception. This is a way bigger question mark now. So +2 amulets are probably overall a little bit more challenging to acquire. You can no longer deterministically craft them yourself, and they're not really SSF viable as much anymore. If you want to kind of make one yourself, you either need to fracture the modifier yourself or go through an absolute circus with Harvest and the bench and all sorts of stuff like that, multiple exalts to make one. This obviously is not great in a league start scenario, meaning you're probably going to have to buy one off someone who's picking up and identifying amulets, which everyone should be doing, by the way, and then hopefully it's not too expensive. But here's the issue. If you're playing a meta build, like, for example, Explosive Arrow, there's going to be some demand and supply issues here. If everyone needs a +2 amulet and they're this rare, they're probably going to be like 5x. And I'm a little bit worried about this on Corrupting Fever as well. It's not as big an issue, but it's definitely something to be concerned about. Compared to just getting the two things yourself and putting them together, it's definitely a lot harder and a lot less deterministic. Therefore, it's another risk and another unknown. Okay, the next one here is the biggest issue we have for Corrupting Fever and any build like it. If you're planning on playing a Mappa build or anything like Lightning Arrow or, something along these lines, Ethereal Knives, Blade Vortex, anything that doesn't have like insane damage scaling up to 5 mil on like bad gear, you're probably in this category I'm about to talk about now. And that is the big boss wall. So Corrupting Fever, its main strength is its mapping potential and its ability to clear fast and have explodey chests and everything like that for free at league start. And it really is a powerful mapper in red maps as well. You can do all the bosses on a low budget and it's absolutely great. And it was able to take advantage of so many of the mapping supplies which are so cheap early on, like Sextants. Now, enter the big boss wall. In order to acquire and even have the ability to use Sextants, you now need to kill Uberelder, Maven, and the 2 new endgame bosses to really get yourself online. In addition to that, to boot, you can acquire 117, I believe, of the Atlas skill points, but to get the last few, which are probably going to be pretty important, you're going to need to do all the endgame content in the game. Certainly very challenging for a build that requires a little bit of gear to be able to get into the bossing potential. Meaning, if you want to kind of get into that kind of a big full endgame state, you're probably going to need to start on a boss killer because Corrupting Fever isn't the most effective bosser without a reasonable amount of gear. Meaning, if you want to just plow content as soon as you get up to it, not the build for you. It's definitely going to be a lot riskier. Obviously, for experienced players and mapping enthusiasts, this isn't a problem, and if you're well in the know and you know a few people who you can hire for a boss carry, you are going to catapult in the lead. But overall, it's definitely going to be a bit of a thorn in people's sides, and if you're looking for a build that can do everything on very low gear, this is certainly not the pick. And if you're planning a build which is like a mapping beast, just keep in mind you're not really going to have access to sextants unless you either buy a carry or have a build that's capable of scaling into being able to do the bosses. But if you're playing a bow build or like a self-cast spell build, which isn't really effective, you may have some issues here, and it could be a little bit of a risk, or a big risk, if you're putting a lot of value on the sextants. But we'll get to that in a second here. Okay, let's take it to the other side now. So obviously there's a ton of risks, ton of downsides. Why, Grimro? Why, you madman, are you going with this build choice? Why don't you just play Explosive Arrow? Well, loyal viewer, there is a massive reason I'm not playing that. Let's start off with the less obvious one first. So Corrupting Fever specifically, and potentially your build too, couldn't really take advantage of too many influence modifiers on the boots, helms, chest, and gloves slot. In fact, this character in the background here you're seeing is not really using an influence chest, it's not really using influence gloves, and it is using an influence helmet, and its boots are pretty much worthless. Well, the new influence system capitalizes on all 4 of those slots, and it does it incredibly well, and it's accessible very early on. Now, the downside though is we don't know what these mods are. About it, all I could tell you is that there's going to be damage over time multiplier on gloves. However, I think there's massive potential for Corrupting Fever to get a massive power boost, maybe even to the point where it can run its own bosses early on from these new mods. However, of course, massive question mark, big mystery. You're going to have to solve this on the fly, itemize your own items. This is a big risk. However, a lot of builds kind of get stuck in this weird space where they can't really take advantage of any influence modifiers. Well, this is your time to shine, because we're getting a whole new suite, and it's possible your build might get turbocharged from it, and it's definitely something to consider. I know that I am very excited, and I'm almost certain there's going to be something that I can use, which is better than an influence chest and boots and gloves, of course. So overall, pretty excited. I think that Corrupting Fever could take advantage of this. If you're a player in the know and you're confident in your kind of min-max skills, this could be a big opportunity for you. Okay, next up, the elephant in the room. If you watched my bossing video, I alluded to the end, and I'm going to do a whole video on this in the future. Everyone is probably going to be rolling a bosser. There's the new bosses. Everyone loves doing the new bosses. There's the massive rework to bossing. And then, of course, there's the big boss wall, which I just talked about. Well, if everyone rolls a bosser, generally bosses don't have very good clear speed early on. Even the poster child of the 3.17 League, Explosive Arrow, doesn't come close to Corrupting Fever in terms of its clear speed. So if you can overcome the big bossing wall, well, suddenly you're in an environment where everyone rolled bosses, they're really good at killing bosses, and they want to buy sets, but hey, there's not too many mappers available to fulfill that demand. Well, just lucky you rolled a mapper, and just because you overcame the big bossing wall, you are going to be pumping the economy full of the things they need, things that are scarce, and things that are really, really in demand. So when one side has massive representation and the other one doesn't, generally the other side that doesn't has the advantage. This was seen in a lot of different leagues, and the best example of this is when a whole bunch of content creators, myself included, lined up to suggest bossing, and the sets of the actual bosses actually cost as much as the average loot you would get. And the people who were winning and laughing all the way to the bank were the mappers, because they were just easily farming and churning out these materials for us, and they weren't spending hardly anything, and they were mapping like a lightning storm, and it was absolutely insane. So overall, that's probably one of the biggest draw cards of rolling a mapper. It's going to be tough business, but at the end of the day, if you can overcome the challenges, you're confident in your skill, and you're confident in the build you're picking, well, you could be in for a massive head start on everyone, and you may in fact scale so fast with so much gear from the currency you're accumulating that you may in fact actually just end up with a bosser, specifically in Corrupting Fever's case, before the bosses even get to the bosses themselves. So it's pretty hilarious, and I think that it's a massive opportunity if you want to go down that route. Of course, the safest pick is to go with a hybrid build like the Explosive Arrow build, which can kind of do a bit of both, but I'm all in on the mapping playstyle. I can't get enough of the speed. I want more. So that's kind of a big point for me. Okay, let's talk about the next point here. Kind of in the vein I just spoke about here, mapping is going to be more powerful than it's ever been before. So as I mentioned in my bossing video previously, definitely check that out by the way, all of the boss keys, so the new ones, all 4 of the new bosses, we have all the Conquerors, all the Elder Guardians, all the Guardians, synth maps, all of these can be acquired from maps simultaneously. You can literally farm them all at the same time. So it's going to be a scenario in which you get like a Guardian map every map. It's completely ridiculous. Kind of compare that to bossing, where you can farm one boss at a time. It's like the buffs just aren't equal. Like mapping has gotten giga buffed, and bossing is kind of like it's got some new stuff there. Yeah, it's got the Orb of Domination and stuff like that. It's gonna be good, but when you compare that to mapping, my goodness, the opportunities are endless. They're limitless, and you can really have a whole lot more flexibility as a mapper and really target what's in demand at any point in time. Generally, bossing is a little bit more rigid. You basically farm what's most profitable, and every bosser is going to hit that nail on the head until it's well and truly flat, and you kind of just all migrate like around to kind of what's most profitable. It can be a little bit challenging, and it can be a little bit demoralizing, especially if you don't get good drops. So that's why I'm going with a mapping playstyle. It's all upside as long as you can overcome the challenges that come with starting a mapper. Okay, next up, obviously we have the new Atlas passive tree. Absolutely absurd. You have infinite potential, 600 passives, you have 132 that you get access to. You can do tons of different leagues, which you couldn't do before at the same time. And to boot, they have also buffed sextants to a ludicrous level, absolutely ludicrous level. I don't think people realize what's about to hit them with the sextant department. They've added new sextants on an insane power level. Just rolling a sextant could net you 4 Conqueror maps, for example. And then also things like the Chayula conversion, ridiculous. All of these things are going to add up to an absolutely disgusting early mapping kind of scenario. You know, sometimes Chayula Breach is like 100 C at league start, and you know, you can get like 15 to 20 splinters per kind of map, and then you just have to roll 1 sextant mod. Are you kidding me? Insane. In addition to that, sextants can no longer be wasted. You can literally itemize and sell all sextant modifiers you don't personally want to use, and I imagine we're going to probably be in a scenario where just by using sextants as you're intended and capturing the ones you don't think you can personally fully use, like maybe I don't have the breach nodes and I capture the Chayula one and sell it, you're probably just going to make money selling sextants. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be really, really lucrative. And I think it's going to be really, really awesome. Okay. Next up, we of course have infinite map sustain. So this is a very end game feature, post 4 void zones, but if you can get there either by like struggling through yourself or paying for a carry, in a post 4 void zone world, you have infinite sustain of any T16 map you want. Insane. Personally, looking forward to some City Square myself, and to boot, what makes it ridiculous is all of the maps on your Atlas are T16, meaning the equity bonus is going to give you more T16s than you know what to do with, and in addition to that, because they're all T16, you can Alk, Chisel, Val them all. If you guys didn't know, when you Alk, Chisel, Val a T16 map, you have only upside. There's no result which requires your map to be bricked. It's going to be pretty damn insane, and there's only going to be the fact that you could get a bad map mod. But you know, in the current day and age, there's not too many that are really going to give you too much trouble, especially if you're playing a build like Corrupting Fever. So pretty damn awesome. Very pumped for that. Massive power available to mappers. Okay, let's talk a little bit more though about the new influence, which is going to be really, really strong. So the new influence is something you can do every map. I don't know exactly how many monsters we're talking here, but Chris said that you can put influence on every map, and as you do more and more influence maps, the density grows. So I'm expecting some pretty seriously massive amount of free mobs here on the level of Elder Influence for free on every map. Pretty damn crazy. Obviously that's a lot more density, a lot more loot, a lot more juice. You know, combine this with some Beyond, my goodness, very, very good. And then obviously you're getting the keys on top of that. Pretty damn nice. Now, what makes this even more juicy though is the new Eldritch Altars. So Eldritch Altars are just a straight up buff to mappers. It's ridiculous. You know, just by slaying monsters, you're gonna get some form of a bonus, whether that's map quantity, whether that's some, you know, item off the boss, and you can get multiple of these. Crazy, really good. Another buff to mappers, really nuts. Okay, and the last one here is the new league mechanic. So the new league mechanic is probably going to be as rewarding as Ultimatum just by the footage right now. I mean, just with that innocence thing alone and the things they've shown, if that's just the tip of the iceberg, okay, this thing's going to be pretty damn good. I imagine you're probably going to be able to get it to the point where you can probably get a 4-stack of reasonable mods every other map, and this is going to be a map per hour kind of league. You cannot trade them, and also you get a fixed amount per map. So speed is king, and that means that you're going to want a speed clear build. You know, if you're playing a boss or a hybrid build and you clear at half the speed of someone on a mapper build, you're going to be able to make way more gains playing a mapping build. So overall, these are the kind of reasons why I'm deciding to roll a mapper. Let's round it all up into a tight little package for you guys and really break it down and solidify this. So obviously, rolling a mapper like Corrupting Fever, incredibly risky. It relies on Conqueror items, it relies on, obviously getting past the boss wall, it requires on, player knowledge and experience in this kind of a playstyle. As such, I do not recommend this for someone who's new. If you're not confident and you haven't played CF before, probably going to be a pretty big risk, and I'd probably go with a hybrid builder instead. This build is not going to be capable of bossing early, but when you do get some currency behind you, it will be. However, with all that said, I'm sorry I'm not going to have the guide out for you guys. It is very unfortunate, but I just don't feel comfortable with it. Next up though, the pros. So with everyone playing bossing, you're going to have an absolute field day on the economy. It's going to be pretty insane, and overall, it's going to be a massive win-win. Now, obviously, we don't know how this is all going to play out. I'm going to give you guys a last few words of wisdom here. So overall, it seems like Explosive Arrow is going to be the play. It has a reasonable clear and very, very good bossing. It uses a ton of uniques, fortunately, which means you're not going to have to lean as much on the Conqueror influence stuff itself. But I'm warning you, definitely be aware that the bow could be a little bit of a choke point, and the +2 amulet is probably going to be a little bit of a pain in the ass because there's going to be so many people playing it. Already, I know there's Palstron, Zizaran, Steel Mage, Crouching Tuna, Path of Math, and who knows how many other people. I think Firegrass is playing as well. So there's definitely, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's gonna be a lot of people playing this thing. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Next one up, expect either crafting or mapping full breakdown, and then once the Atlas passive tree is released, you're going to get a whole bunch of action with that. Of course, if everything goes well, I'll release a Corrupting Fever build for you guys as a second build, or if your league starter goes particularly badly, you can pick it up as a league starter, and it's probably hopefully going to be timeless. But without further ado, I'm going to end the video up here. Thank you so much for watching. As always, hopefully you keep enjoying it. Until next time, cheers.